Okay, welcome to part C. We're now going to talk about supply and demand curves, putting them together. And so I think I'm going to go a little long on session 7. I think it's going to be an hour and a half or a little bit longer. I'm trying to keep these to an hour and 15 minutes, so I apologize. Hopefully, now last time I was a little bit shorter, so you owe me, but hopefully also I can make it up, go a little shorter in future sessions. Okay. So, what I want to do is talk about figure 5.1 in the book. Okay. So there it is. Okay. So, here's how it works. So, first, 5.1, it talks about the quantity and supply of guitars for acoustic guitars. So the key word is acoustic. Later we'll talk about a substitute as electric guitars, but for now we're just talking about acoustic guitars. And suppose that the demand curve looks as follows. Okay, so as always, put price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis, and so we have three possible prices: 300, 500, and $700. And we assume that demand is as follows. When the price is 700, then people will only want to buy 800 guitars. So we have a dot here. When the price is 500, people will demand a little more. They'll demand 1,000 guitars. So we have a dot at 1,000 and 500, and then when the price is 300, we assume that people will want to buy 1,200 guitars. Okay, so remember, don't forget, law of demand. Demand curves are downward sloping. That means as the price goes down, people demand more of them. Okay, that's what we have here. The demand curve looks like this. Okay, meanwhile, the supply curve looks as follows. If the price is 300, then suppliers will be willing to sell 800 guitars. Okay. Next, if the price is 500, suppliers will be willing to supply 1,000 guitars. And if the price is 700, suppliers will be willing to sell 1,200. So, supply looks like that. Okay. Now, the book asks you, what if, for some reason, the market price were $700? If you like, think about the government made a mandate, said guitars must be sold at $700. That's the only allowable price for acoustic guitars. What would happen? Okay. Well, if the price were $700, we can look on the demand curve and see 800 people would want to buy guitars at that price. Meanwhile, sellers will be willing to sell 1,200 guitars at that price. So what that means is there is an excess supply. 1,200 suppliers would be willing to put 1,200 guitars onto the market. Buyers would only be willing to buy 800, and we call that distance the excess supply. Okay. On the other hand, I'll move to a red marker. What if instead the government or someone said, no, price can only be $300. If the price were $300, should have made these dots match up. Demanders would say, we're willing to buy 1,200 guitars at that price. Meanwhile, suppliers, we saying, we're only willing to supply, to sell 800 guitars at that price. So if the price were $300, here again, the difference is going to be 400. Maybe it's unfortunate that the book made it that way, didn't? But either way, it's 400 is the difference between demand versus supply, and when that happens, we call it. You could call it excess demand. Another word for it is just a shortage. Okay. So next, what we want to think about. Suppose we go back to this case where there's an excess supply. The price for $700. Suppliers are willing to put 1,200 guitars on the market. Buyers are only willing to buy 800. What do you think suppliers would do? They'd say, well, I've got all these extra guitars. I don't want to be stuck with them. I'm going to try to sell them. I'm going to try, if as long as there weren't a government mandate, suppose instead it was just, accidentally the price were at 700 or some outside reason, suppliers would say, okay, I'm going to undercut that price. I'm going to go to $6.99, and I'm going to get more people. These 800 people are willing to buy. I'm going to try to get them to buy from me. And then when the other suppliers see that, well, everyone's going to buy from that guy. I want to get rid of my excess supply of guitars. I'm willing to go to $6.98 and so on. They keep on doing that. They keep undercutting each other's price until eventually, once they get to $500, the number of guitars people are willing to supply would go down to 1,000. And if that price is 500, the number of guitars people are willing to buy is also 1,000. We say that's the market clears when that happens. There's the same number of guitars supplied equals the same number of guitars demanded. The number of guitars sold equals the number of guitars bought, and everyone's happy. So the book calls it the market clearing price, and the 1,000 would be the market clearing quantity. In other textbooks, they often call it the equilibrium. So I will probably slip up and use the word equilibrium. I mean them as synonyms if I do that. But in other textbooks, they would call that the equilibrium price is 500, the equilibrium quantity is 1,000. The book says the market clearing price is 500, the market clearing quantity is 1,000. If on the other hand, we went from the other case, if the price were 300, the demand were 1,200, number of guitars offered to be sold would be 800. What would happen is these demanders would start saying, hey, you suppliers, I know the price is supposed to be 300. I'll give you 301. Okay, I really want a guitar, and I'm willing to pay. Lots of these demanders are willing to pay a lot higher price than this 300. Okay, so they're willing to offer much higher than 300. They may try to get a deal, say only 301. But then if they say 301, someone else is going to say, oh, I'll compete with you and offer 302, and so on. They keep doing that till eventually they reach the price where the number of guitars offered to be sold is equal to the guitars offered to be bought. Okay, so that is first part about how markets clear, how we put demand and supply curves together. Okay, the next thing I want you to think about how we sometimes have shifts in supply curves or a shift in the demand curve. And the books, I'm in page 104 of the 13th edition. It's called Changing Market Conditions. And the first paragraph says, suppose, for example, the price of spruce fell. Okay. So I want you to think about this. So before we had price, quantity, we have demand, we have supply. Before we had 500 is market clearing price, 1,000 is market clearing quantity. Okay, so we're going to talk about things that cause a shift in the demand or supply curve. Always remember, usually if we have a shift in the supply curve, it will be because somehow manufacturing costs went down or went up for some reason. Okay, so here we have an example. It says, suppose that the price of spruce fell. So that's one of the raw materials to make a guitar, spruce. So that goes down. So the price falls. This means suppliers are going to be willing to supply more at a given price, or for a given quantity be willing to supply it at a lower price. So either way, we would say the supply curve, you can call this shifting out, or you can, if you like, calling it shifting down. Either way, it looks the same. Okay, so when the price of spruce falls, that makes it cheaper to manufacture a guitar. The supply curve is going to shift out or down. So here's what would happen. That means the equilibrium, or the market clearing price. So before P was 500, the new P is going to be this new spot where the supply and demand cross. So this is going to be the new market clearing price. And this is going to be the new market clearing quantity. Okay. Okay. Now, second thing. Okay. When does the demand curve shift? Okay. Usually with those cases, it's when there's taste change for some reason. There's some, we call it exogenous or outside factor causes things to shift. The weather, incomes go up, or there's some new fashion that makes taste change. Okay, that will cause the demand curve to change. Another thing that will cause the demand curve to change is if the price of a substitute or complement goes up or down. Okay, so the next paragraph says, consider a different example. What if the price of electric guitars were to increase? Okay, the key thing there is that an electric guitar is a substitute for an acoustic guitar. Okay, so when that happens, let's see. Go back to our original supply and demand curves. Okay, when the price of electric guitars increases, okay, so if electric guitars are more expensive, you'll be more willing to buy an acoustic guitar. Okay, so that means the demand for acoustic guitars increases. Okay, there's two ways to write that. We could say that the demand curve shifts out. That is, at every price, you're willing to buy more of it. Okay. Or another way of saying it, at any quantity, people are willing to pay a higher price. That would mean the demand curve shifts up. Either way, the new demand curve looks the same. It shifts, call it in the northeast direction. Okay. You can call that an outward shift or an upward shift. Same thing. When that happens, okay, so the price of a substitute goes up. What happens? Well, we get a new market clearing price. This one is higher. We get a new market clearing quantity. Here again, as before, this one is higher. Okay. We won't do this yet, but later we'll talk about by how much will price increase, how much will quantity increase. You could see for that same shift, if instead the supply curve had been very steep, that would cause the price to increase a lot, but not cause the quantity to change very much. Instead, if the supply curve had been very shallow, the opposite would happen. It would cause the price to shift only a little bit upward, but meanwhile, it would cause the quantity to shift a lot outward. Okay, that's beyond the scope of chapter 5, but I'm just giving you a foretaste. We will talk more about that in future chapters. Okay, now let me do one problem before I end this session, before I end session 7. I want you to get some practice. This is always a good question. Almost definitely there'll be a question on the exam. I'll say something like, here's something that happened. What does this cause? Does this cause a shift in the demand curve or cause a shift in the supply curve? Okay. Key is if it's something that causes manufacturing costs to go up or down, okay, that means a shift in the supply curve. If there's something that causes taste to change or causes the price of a substitute or complement to go up or down, that will be a shift in the demand curve. Okay. All right. So, let's go back to the original supply and demand curves. I'm going to do problem 6. Okay. I think I'm going to do 6A. Where is this? 6A. Okay. So suppose what would happen if the market clearing price of acoustic guitars, 5.1, if people turned on to some accordion craze and started losing interest in learning to play the guitar. Okay, so that's some fashion that caused taste to change. Okay, that would mean it's a change, a shift in the demand curve. And what happened, it caused shifts. Okay, people all of a sudden wanted to start playing the accordion, so that means they're less interested in guitars. When that happens, the demand curve shifts inward. One way of saying it, at every price, people are willing to buy fewer guitars. So this, at that price, people before were willing to pay that quantity. Now they're only willing to buy that quantity. Okay, that's a shift inward, or you can interpret it, it's a shift downward. At any given quantity, people are willing to pay a smaller price. Okay, either way, we say the demand curve either shifts inward or downward, or if you like, let's call it in the southwestern direction. Okay, so that is 1. Okay, what about 2? The price of electric guitars were to fall substantially. Okay, electric guitars are a substitute. If they fall, people are going to be willing to buy acoustic guitars less. Okay, same thing. We'd say the demand curves shifts either downward or inward. Okay. Part 3, the number of acoustic guitar makers decide to exit the market and make violins instead. Okay, well there's a case. It's not quite manufacturing costs have gone up, but it's some, I'll use the word exogenous. So this is some outside the system shock. Okay, so for some reason, the number of acoustic guitar makers have exited the market. Okay, that means the supply is less. In that case, we would say it's a shift in the supply curve, suppliers are willing to make fewer guitars, so that means it's got to be a shift inward. So it would look like that. Okay, that would be part 3. Okay, I'm going to skip B. I'll encourage you to do that on your own. Now let's do C. Okay, uh, what effect would you expect each of the following to have on the market for domestically grown cotton? Okay, all right. First, nylon is invented. Okay, let me erase the supply curve. Okay, so nylon. Okay, is not anything like an intermediate good in making cotton. Okay, nylon is just a substitute for cotton. Okay, so if people are willing to use nylon clothes rather than cotton clothes, that's a substitute. So if nylon is invented, okay, so that means there's a substitute that didn't exist before. It's more readily available. So this means that demand for cotton is probably going to go down. Okay, so if that were the case, we'd say the demand looks like the new demand curve looks like this. By the way, so I haven't been doing this on the last problem. So it asks, what would you expect on the effect on the market clearing price and the market clearing quantity? Well, we'd say before that point was the market clearing price. For the new demand curve, that is the market clearing price. And before, let's call it small q, that was the market clearing quantity. Now, this point is the market clearing quantity. Market clearing quantity goes down, market clearing price goes down. Okay. Okay, nylon is invented. Okay, part C2, the cotton gin is invented. Okay. For this one, what happens when the cotton gin is invented, that means it's easier to produce cotton. Okay. The cost for producing cotton will go down. When the costs go down, supply is going to go up. Okay. So it means, call it the supply curve either shifts outward or, if you like, it shifts down. At any given quantity, the price will be lower. Okay. When that happens, the market clearing price will go before the market clearing price was here. Market clearing quantity was here. Now, the market clearing price is here. The market clearing quantity is here. Okay. Number 3, the boll weevil becomes extinct. Okay. So the boll weevil, this affects manufacturing. This makes the costs go down. It's easier to produce cotton. Remember, it does not affect taste, and it's not a substitute for cotton. Okay, so it's not going to affect the demand curve. This affects the supply curve. Here again, it's going to cause it to shift outward. Okay, some other things are going to happen. Market clearing quantity is going to go up. Market clearing price is going to go down. Okay, now, number 4 says foreign cotton growers bring in an exceptionally large harvest. Okay, now, if you had noticed before, it says, what effect would you expect each of the following to have on the market for domestically grown cotton. Okay, so before our graph had been the supply and demand curve for domestic cotton. Okay, so all of a sudden, foreign cotton um, has increased. Okay, so that's going to mean the price of foreign cotton is going to go down. Okay, so a substitute, foreign cotton is a substitute for domestic cotton. Okay, the price has gone down. That means the demand for domestic cotton is going to go down. People are going to be willing to pay a smaller price uh, than they were before. So let's change supply and demand curves. Okay. This was the supply and demand curves. Foreign grown cotton, there's an especially good harvest. That means the price of foreign grown cotton is going to go down. When that happens, people demanding domestic grown cotton will go down. At any given quantity, they're willing to pay a smaller price for it. So that means the new demand curve will look like that, which means new quantity, market clearing quantity will go down. Market clearing price also will go down. Okay, so that's the answer. Part C, I encourage you to try B and D on your own, as well as E, F, G, and so on. Okay, there's lots and lots of parts of question 6. Okay, so that's part C. I'm going to finish it up. I know this has been 3 kind of long videos, so I'm going to end it there. Okay, so that was session 7. For session 8, I will finish up chapter 5. There's a chance I may do a little bit of 6, but the key is try to read chapter 5, the rest of chapter 5 ahead of time. Okay, see you then at session 8.